But Malcolm saw that some of our people's philosophy was to ask for entry into the house of our oppressor, right? And what Malcolm was teaching you, he was teaching you we need to build our own house.
That's right. That's right.
We need to build our own house and be self-determined, right? We need to run these things for ourselves, right? And you'll never truly be free until you have those things, right? And so we have a litany of questions here, and I don't really know the order of we're supposed to address those things now, or whether we're supposed to go into the discussion. But the point is that, you know, I'm truly honored to be speaking on my favorite hero by far. And the brother, you know, was just a brilliant mix of patience and not patience. He was impatient, right? He was definitely impatient, but he needed to be. But he was a brilliant understanding of what our struggle was. He was just a brilliant brother, right? He was a brilliant brother who loved our people. And what Malcolm said is, if you don't love the people, sooner or later you will betray them. So that Chokwe Lumumba didn't start that. That was Malcolm who said that, right? And he had a true understanding of that. And what Malcolm was, he was honest. Malcolm was honest. You know, he said, I'm for truth no matter who tells it, right? I'm for justice no matter who it's for or against, right? And so he spoke truth. He spoke to our condition. And what he did was, you know, he was honest about who he was, right? Sometimes we get into these discussions where we have these open dialogues about our heroes and our sheroes, and we can't truly be honest about what they taught us, and we can't be honest about their personal shortcomings. Malcolm told you about himself, right? Malcolm told you that he was a pimp at one time. Malcolm told you all the things he did because he wanted to open himself up so that you can get a transparent view of who he was. Because when we block those things off, when we feel that we can't be transparent in who we are, right? Then we really can't be transparent in the things that we're trying to tackle, right? And so, you know, I just have so much love and admiration for the brother, not only in terms of what we see on a political or social or, you know, revolutionary standpoint, but in a personal, you know, regard in which, you know, the principles which need to guide our lives. Malcolm was the type of brother who could speak to all of these things. And I'll pass the mic.
Wow. Oh, wow. Well, first of all, it tears me up, like Percy Sled says. It tears me up inside when I come up in here because I am in the Lumumba Center, and then I've got to listen to Lumumba's baby boy, and so it just is tough. But it's also reassuring to know that we have young revolutionaries with straight backs and clear minds and open eyes and no shuffling, no head bowing, no apologizing. Yeah. It makes me feel so good and so strong. Yes. It makes me feel young, and I am not young. I got 3 grandbabies, but I'm looking good. That's right. Yeah. And I'm looking good because I try to stay with the right political line. I try to stay with the truth. I try to make sure I honor the teachings that have brought me so far. And I was joking with Antar and Mr. Figures before we started. I said, I want y'all to look at a Facebook message from my child, Tangemana Hazina Knight. And Tangemana was named by Amiri Baraka, who was my early teacher in our struggle, along with our comrade Chokwe. All of us grew up in the movement together. Chokwe was our big brother in the movement. He was slightly older, but he thought he was way older. And so he would boss us around and we would take it. And then when I became a lawyer, I thought I was his equal, but I realized I wasn't. I had to still take instruction, June, and just do whatever he told me to do. And in that spirit, I learned so much about what Malcolm was really about. And how no matter how many Negroes came along later and said, yeah, I knew Malcolm. I talked with him. I met with him. I shared things with him. We know people who actually did know Malcolm and lived what Malcolm was all about, and more than referenced Malcolm, they revered and respected and embodied the principles of Malcolm. And I say with great admiration and respect to our brother, the real anointed mayor of Jackson, leader and brother. I'm so proud of you, son. I'm so proud of you. I really am. I want to take you back, and some of you are really coming forward because you don't even know this history, because you're babies. But I had to bring in some dinosaur material for you, just to let you know how long we've been dealing with these issues, so people don't get it twisted. When folks started occupying, folks thought, oh, great, this is a wonderful movement, thinking that, like Columbus, it was something that had just been discovered. We have to avoid the Columbusonian syndrome, no matter what form it comes in. So I brought along a 1981 edition of Black Scholar. How many of you are young enough to know about Black Scholar? The most famous cover you probably may remember is the one with John Carlos and Tommy Smith when they threw their fist in the air when they got their medals during the Olympics. And of course, summarily the medals were taken away, but I don't think those brothers really cared about those medals. I think that back at that time when our people were being slaughtered, they understood why they were carrying that torch and why they wore those medals and on whose shoulders they stood. And I feel like, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, but I thought I would bring you just a couple of passages about what? What's the title? What's the edition? What is the special edition called? Everybody see it? And so for those who think this is some new phenomenon, that this just started, where our people are being shot down and killed with impunity, by the way. Every killer has gotten away except maybe one or two, but things are changing because we're in the streets, and this time we're staying in the streets. And why are we staying in the streets? Because we not broke down old heads who thought it was going to be over in 25 years. We got young revolutionaries who are determined to stand in the face of oppression. And that's the only way. The only way is resistance, not cooperation, not conciliation, not obedience, and not huddling in a corner trying to figure out how can we make the status quo work? How can we peacefully exist with something that started with an auction block and genocide? You can't reconcile it. You can't be a part of it. You gotta not only change it, you gotta dismantle it. And that's why Antar's comment about what Malcolm said, we don't need to be going in Massa's house. We need to build our own house. That's called self-determination. So I want to read you a couple of passages about police repression. It was written by comrades in the 1980s. Police repression against Blacks. The racist police repression against the Black community today has a long and violent history. From the earliest days to the present, Blacks have had an imposed relationship of antagonism with the police. During slavery, the control of Blacks was essential in a system whose profits were accrued through exploitation of cheap and free labor. Consequently, the slaveholders created their own elaborate brand of control over the slaves, which corresponded to the special needs of the peculiar institution. Slaves were always resisting the inhumanity of the slave system, and constant attempts to escape was one form this resistance took. Now I want to share another one with you. And I know some of you probably remember this brother, and I hope everybody who doesn't remember him will go back and Google information about the late brother Damu Smith. And Damu was a powerful brother in our movement. He was an environmental justice fighter. He was a human rights fighter in our movement. That quote I read was from him, but here's another piece where he pulls the covers off of the system itself. The history and process of development and organization of police in the US can only be understood when historical changes in capitalist productive and social relations are taken into account. A little bit more history for you. I dug deep. I went back to Steve Biko, who also was murdered in custody. So we don't get it twisted and start thinking that these murders in custody are new. These murders in custody are not new. And what he said to us in this book called The Essentials of Stephen Biko. And I urge you to get, now I got my copy in South Africa, but you can go on Amazon pretty much and get anything. They got all our secrets, they got our papers, they got everything. You can probably check them. It's kind of scary, but you can probably get this from Amazon. If not, I might let you photocopy it, but I'm not gonna let you borrow it. He says the racism we meet does not, I'm sorry, let me go back. Let me back up a bit. White people now despise Black people, not because they need to reinforce their attitude and so justify their position of privilege, but simply because they actually believe that Black is inferior and bad. This is the basis upon which whites are working in South Africa, and is what makes South Africa and its society racist. The racism we meet does not only exist on an individual basis, it is also institutionalized to make it look like the South African way of life. Although of late there has been a feeble attempt to gloss over overt racist elements in the system, it is still true that the system derives its nourishment from the existence of anti-Black attitudes in society. And don't you love it when those who look like us try to apologize? Over and over again, they try to apologize for racism. So here I come, way back now. I'm back so far. I want you to know I'm back so far. I'm in Holly Springs now, Marshall County with Ida B. Wells. And she says, and this is why we got to work night and day to get people like Antar in. He should have been the mayor. He is the mayor. We got to get him in. We got to get him in. We got to work for Kathy. We got to get Kathy in, right? And Walter Zinn was a law clerk of mine who knew he was going to step up and show out the way he's done. So that brother is another ally that we can count on. Keep the waters troubled is what Ida B. Wells said. Keep the waters troubled. Where are our leaders when the race is being burnt, shot, and hanged? Holding good fat offices and not saying a word. They tell us this great government can protect us citizens on foreign soil, but is helpless when it comes to protecting them at home. And hence, however much the Negro is abused and outraged, our leaders make no demands. Hear me now. Our leaders make no demands on the country to protect us, nor come forward with any practical plan for changing the condition of affairs. Few big offices and control of a little federal patronage are not sufficient recompense for the lives lost, the blood shed, and the rights denied the race. Did you hear me? That was back when, in the 1800s, that was Ida B. Wells. I'm sorry, 1920. Ida, early Ida. But still on point and asking the question, where are they? Where are our leaders when our people, when our kids are found in a pool of blood, lying in pools of blood all across this country, from Mississippi, James C. Anderson, to Tamar Price. Rice is the name, Price or Rice, I'm sorry, Tamar Rice in Cleveland, Ohio, 12 years old with a toy gun, who's speaking out, who's calling press conferences, who's begging the young people, the young revolutionaries in the tradition of Steve Biko, who called out for Black consciousness when he was a teenager. In the tradition of our young brother here, Antar Lumumba, we got to keep it real. We got to start supporting our young people and stop hating on them. Stop trying to turn them into Negroes like that. What is that promise keeper stuff that, Obama, with the, everybody in a necktie and everybody sell out. I'm serious. We got to stop these programs that create more Negroes. We don't need any more Negroes. We got our affirmative action quota of Negroes. Now we need stand-up Black men and women. Stand-up Black men and women are what we need now. We don't need any more Negroes. I want to close, and I did a little typed up speech, but that's what'll happen to you when you get educated in the oppressor's institutions. You think all you need to do is type up some stuff and bring it in. Well, I typed it, I threw that thing to the side because I knew I wouldn't need it, because first of all, I'm at home with my people. And if I blunder and falter, y'all know I'm real, and I'm going to stay real. So while our people are slaughtered under the color of law, there is no help. while our people are abused at work, poisoned in their neighborhoods, ravaged by drugs and violence, turned on ourselves by ourselves, while our people live in squalor and smell the stench of poverty, there is no help. We need big voices. Small voices are not heard. We need bold moves. Timid moves are ignored, even by us, right? You see somebody going like this one. Hey, Monica, I'm just glad to be at the meeting. Look, stand up and push it out from your diaphragm. Everybody, you don't have to have a big mouth like mine to push it out. You push it out and you stand tall and watch these young people and do what they do. That's what I'm doing, like Ella Baker did. That's what I'm doing. So I close with my poem called Crab Boil. Crab Boil. Lynch Willie. Lynch Willie. Willie Lynch, what did you say? How you know? What? What you say, how you know? Give me mines, I'll move on. Won't look back. Give me mines and I'll obey. Won't look back. No need of them calling me. Won't look back. If you grab my hand, pull me up, won't look back. If you go first, I'll pull you down. Won't look back. The crab's tight, fisted, tight-lipped, shiftless eyes nod in agreement with the plan. Feeling no rage, feeling no pain, caring only about the fistful of nothing. What you say? How you know? What you say? How you know? For my massa tells me so. The crabs sting each other's sides, scramble and scratch at the bottom. Give me mines, won't look back. Give me mines, I'll obey. Won't look back. What you say, how you know? What you say, how you know? For my massa tells me so. Thank you, Malcolm, for giving us a place in the field so we wouldn't be up in the cob-infested, the disgusting stench of privilege that the massa had for us while selling us and raping us and plundering us. Thank you for giving us permission to be in the field. What you say, how you know? What you say, how you know?
This is difficult for me to be in the end of all of that.
That's why I went first.
But let me just say one thing in correction. The brother said that I have been a part of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. I have not, but I was greatly influenced by people, a large number of people who had. The other thing though, my understanding of what we're doing here, we're gonna all get another chance to speak again. Okay. So one of the things that has happened to me is that I have lived long enough to see groups of young people, younger people like yourselves, doing things that people did 40, 45 years ago. Some of the things that she read, she was reading from something that was 45 years old. And it was kind of fresh to folk like myself then. But to see you all in this room, the landscape was much different. The red, black, and green flag in the rear. It was a time right here in Jackson, Mississippi, when if you wore a little button, a little tiki that was red, black, and green, or if it was culturally centric, you'd be arrested. It was a time right here in Jackson, Mississippi, Jackson State's campus, Tougaloo's campus, that if you had a natural, that you'd be arrested, just like that, taken to jail, and your hair would be cut with sheep shears, and then they'd release you, and you would go on back. That's just how much of a symbol of defiance that was to the establishment at that time. But things happen, things change. And it was because of the resistance of a large number of people. I was at Lanier High School last week. Just this past Saturday, and pointed to some pictures, some photographs of athletes. And in 1963, these athletic photographs were of people that didn't have naturals. But in 1969, the athletic photographs did have naturals in public schools, even though it was segregated in 63, 64, 65, 68. People couldn't wear naturals in the segregated public schools because it was a symbol of defiance. But those things changed now, so we can do that kind of thing. I was in a conversation earlier this afternoon, and thank you for choosing me to come to this. I don't know why I was chosen, but it just really does me good to be here, because I've thought about some things over the last couple of weeks that really, in the course of my life, in the course of my day, I wouldn't get to think about. And now you allowed me a chance to talk about them. So I was talking with a preacher, of all people, a pastor, just earlier this afternoon. And I was saying, let them know what I was going to do this evening. And I said, well, you know, by the way, we would be this time of the year planning for our African Unity Rally. You know, it's always been the weekend closest to Malcolm X's birthday. And he said, well, you know, bro, Frank, you know, you're right. We would be. And this is that weekend coming up. So for 15 consecutive years, we had this unity rally. And it was similar to this event where you brought together people within the African diaspora of different ideas, different ways of thinking, believing different strategies and different tactics. But we brought them together, put them on in a place where they could get to talk about the things that they were passionate about. And we would promote it, advertise it, so people would be able to come and glean from all of the ideas and the wisdom that was shared. There was a time, the Republic of New Africa, of which I like to say that the Malcolm X Grassroots organization and Jackson Rising is a metamorphosis of. But there was a time during these African Unity rallies that the Republic of New Africa wasn't present, because the first one was in '69, and it was maybe a year or so later when the RNA came to Jackson. So, but when they came, they had space. The All African People's Revolutionary Party, Black elected officials, as few as it was then, people, organizations whose passion it was to seek the advancement, the elevation, the promotion of a people who had been historically neglected and left out. Anybody that had a passion for that would be given space on these programs to express their ideas. Of course, they were always climaxed by a person who I have been influenced by, Stokely Carmichael, who later became Kwame Ture. He would always give the climax, the keynote address. But after the climax and keynote address would be given, we would have the thing called the African Ball. And at the African Ball, usually would be at a support a supportive nightclub where somebody was spinning records, progressive music that existed then. And it was one of the features of the African ball, just like one of the features is here. Food. Food from the Caribbean, food from here in the South, food from the continent of Africa. So all of that would be a part of this African unity experience that we would try to create for people in this area. So to be here with you all and to have that flush of memories to come back in my head over these last few days, it's really been tremendous. I showed up at work today with this shirt. Several people said, I like that shirt. Well, you know, and that's fine. We used to call them dashikis, but people wore them at the time that back then, during this African unity period, subject to arrest. Can you believe that?
That's right.
Just because of what you wore, the way you wore your hair, how you, not how you thought, but just how you looked. Repression would come to stamp you out. But listen, it didn't win. Look at you today. So when I see you all anywhere, on the street, in the grocery store, wherever, I know that we are advancing and gaining ground. It's sort of like the spirituals Jacob ladder. Every round, every generation, it gets higher and higher, better and better. It does not yet appear, but we will be.
So I want to thank Jaribu, Choko Yantar, and Frank, Mr. Figures, for their contributions. We're going to open it up for some dialogue and questions. So anybody have any questions?
Are we going to these questions?
No, first we're just going to deal with that, then we'll come back with the questions. Any questions out there? Any reflections?
Mr. Figures, I'm glad you mentioned about the unity rally that we used to have years ago. Do you think there's a possibility we could bring that type of rally together? I mean, you had music. I mean, I was young, but I would attend African Liberation Day rallies, and they were just off the chain. You know, I learned so much. Got to meet people from all over the world. Do you think there's a possibility that we can?
The short answer is yes. The long answer is, in many ways, it happens in so many segments around town. The cultural artists are performing in nightclubs, doing poetry, you know, open mic. You know, all of this is happening. You know, I come in here and saw the drums. Your sister met her husband at one of the African Unity rallies. He was
Wow.
he was an accomplished and still is drummer, you know, a percussionist, you know. So I mean, in so many ways, yes,
Well,
we can do it again.
I mean, it needs to be. I mean, all these different venues and elements, they need to be brought together. I mean, it's just hard to describe what went on at our African Liberation Day rallies. I mean, it was just hard.
And also in the early 70s, there was no question we would be in DC every year and led by Kwame Ture and the All African People's Revolutionary Party and other groups, including the Republic of New Africa. We would be in DC and we would have African Liberation Day, but it would be sort of the climax. It would be the culminating event, because all that week we would be at Howard University in Crampton Hall having workshops and seminars and teach-ins, and folks would just be ready to learn and then spread what they learned. I forgot to mention that in that same Black Scholar issue, and I am going to make a copy of some of these articles available to the Lumumba Center, and we've been talking, Safia Omari and myself have been talking about getting on board on Kali's agenda to talk about a library and getting people to donate to the Lumumba Library. But there's an article in this 1981 issue about the history of the Republic of New Africa, written by none other than Chokwe Lumumba. He walks us through the history of the RNA and what happened in Mississippi, in particular, the repression and the terror that was rained upon our people during that period. So it's an excellent piece, and it's part of the Black Scholar issue from 1981. And of course, the focus of this issue, as I said, was police brutality. But in this same piece is an article, a history lesson from Chokwe about the Republic of New Africa. And I think, Kathy, you're right. I think Black consciousness is something that we need. I think there's an awareness movement that is begging to happen. People need to not be afraid of their heritage, not be afraid to embody and personify their own Blackness. Black is beautiful. It doesn't mean white people are ugly. It doesn't mean we hate white people. It means we love ourselves. And I think sometimes the confusion comes because we lift up our culture and how we express ourselves as a people. We are taught that to do that is to shun others, and that's not what it's about. Just like Black Lives Matter. Every time I say it, some Negro says to me, all lives matter. Well, hell, I know that. I've been around, I've been fighting for all lives all my life. But right now, pools of blood. Who's in those pools of blood laying in the street? When you say Black Lives Matter, you say all lives matter, because all life comes from. Right. Originally comes from. And nobody wants to deal with it. You know, because they think to deal with that is to say that other people don't matter. But when you say Black Lives Matter, that takes it up a notch in terms of consciousness, because in South Africa, the consciousness was around being Black, and everybody who identified with the new system and the decolonization of South Africa, they were part of the Black consciousness movement. So I think we need it. I think we need it.
Let me just add this, because we kind of got into a discussion both in the history of our struggle, right? And we're bringing it present day. And I think a lot of this is relevant to what we're discussing here. First of all, when Brother Josephus was giving us his talent there, he was gracing us with his talent. And I was laughing with Brother Figures about one of the lyrics where he said, Skip Obadeli turned the pigs into skin, right? And if you really understand the history of the struggle, and we're talking about things such as police brutality, then let's talk right here in Jackson, Mississippi. And we don't necessarily, you know, for the purposes of this discussion, I'm going to talk about the past, but we can bring this present day, not only in the country, but right here in Jackson, Mississippi, right? Believe me, I can do that. Believe me, I can do that. I have people who come in my office all the time who are being brutalized by police, right? But what he was talking about, Amari Obadeli, for those of you who don't know, and I know there are several people in the audience who do, who are older than me, just like me, you know, that have that history. But for those of you who I know you don't, you need to understand that history, because, you know, those of you who don't know your history are bound to repeat it, right? And that's where we find ourselves right now in this moment. Amari Obadeli was the president of the Republic of New Africa. When they say the RNA, this was a group here that was trying to promote self-determination for our people right here in Jackson, Mississippi, right? And what happened, and I'm going to tell you, as my father told me when he would tell me stories and he would give me history lessons, he said, I'm not telling you what to think. I'm teaching you how to think. So anything that I say, I challenge you to look it up for yourselves and go through the history. But you can find this right there in the Sovereignty Commission papers. What they did was they set up a plan to take down the RNA, right? They recruited a brother that they had let out of prison, right, and sent him to the RNA's house under the pretext. Their plan was to send him to the RNA house. And after he went to the RNA house, they were going to come to the RNA house under the pretext that they were harboring a fugitive, right? But what happened is their plan didn't go quite as they thought it would, because they sent the brother there, and once he got there, he was exhibiting conduct unbecoming of a member, right? And so the brother got kicked out the house, right? But they still decided to raid this house anyway, and this house is right on Dalton Street. Dalton Street. I don't know the exact number of the house I used to, but
Lewis Street.
Lewis Street. I'm sorry, brother. It is Lewis. I'm sorry. But what happened is this house that they shot up had, first of all, understand the conditions. It was men, women, and children in this house, right? But what the police officers did not know is that this house had a kind of an underground exit, right? So they were able to get the sisters and the children out of the house, right, through the underground exit. And many of the brothers got out the house, and while they were shooting at the house, the brothers were firing back in self-defense from the grass, right? And so that's how they were able to defend themselves. And who got killed was Skinner, right? Skinner. And if you think that you've heard that name before, well, you may have heard it in a number of ways. You got a judge named Skinner, and you also have a police training facility named after Skinner, right? We hold Skinner like he was some honorable man. And let's skip. And we really gonna go into this history. Let's skip before we get to the RNA, when they shot up this house, and they had no reason to shoot up these brothers and sisters, right? Skinner was one of the main officers, and we're looking at the 45th anniversary of the shooting of the brothers Gibbs and Green at Jackson State, right? And Skinner was one of the officers who fired on the kids who were killed at Jackson State, right? And so now we have all these young black officers, right, that are coming through this police training facility, right? Named after someone who would have been after their lives, right? Named after someone who would have been after their lives. And so what we have now, flashing forward, I think what we're seeing is the cycle of oppression and resistance, which takes place every so often, right? And so when we see young people taken to the streets, right, and exhibiting the pain of long-held pain that they have from just the brutality and the things that take place at the hand of oppression and police violence, right? They're standing out against it, right? That's right. And so there's a number of things that we see that we really, we applaud, but it's really the wrong thing to applaud, right? I know that there was this thing on social media where people were talking, it was on social media and the news, where they were putting out this mother who had beat her child because he was out there rioting, right? Well, he was resisting. That's what he was doing, right? Rebelling. He was out there rebelling, and so we're like, yeah, that's a good mother. That's a good mother. Do that, right? And really, what are you teaching that child, right? You're emasculating that child, right? You're telling him to just bow down to what you know is wrong, right? And telling him not to resist, right? And so to answer this question, because I'm trying to get to these questions, right? I keep talking about it. To talk about, what do we look at when we face this genocide, and how do we deal with that? First of all, Malcolm talked about us being self-determined. That's right. Self-determined people don't have to cry out for the murderers of their children to be tried, right? That's not what happens with self-determined people, right? If you really controlled any of the things that made the system tick and made it move, then you wouldn't have to worry about your children's murders being tried, right? You wouldn't have to worry about whether we're not talking about convictions, right? That's what people don't understand. We're not even talking about whether the trials end up in the favor or in the way that we want them to end up. We can't even get it in the courtroom. That's right. Right? That's right. We can't even get it in the courtroom, and anybody who knows anything about the law, right? The overwhelming majority of cases are indicted. The overwhelming majority of cases for the average criminal defendant, right, get indicted and sent to trial, right? So there's more than ample evidence for these cases at least to go to trial, right? And so that's not what happens with self-determined people. That's not what takes place. And so we really have to get an understanding of what it really means and what it's really going to take for us to become self-determined. And Malcolm said it had to be a by any means necessary approach, right? And we have to understand what by any means necessary meant, right? I was just listening to the piece a second ago where he said, look, I want to, you know, I want to live with upstanding, honest, you know, people in a society where we can all be together, you know. But he said until the oppression ends, then we can't do that, right? So we have to be self-determined. And what does that mean? What my favorite quote, and I have to find some way to throw this in there, from Malcolm is, he said, first of all, he said that when you self-defense is violence, it's intelligence, right? And he said, protect your life with everything you have. It's the most valuable thing you got. But if you must lose your life, make sure it's even Steve.
Hello.
So we have to make sure, and we have to make sure that our children understand that you know, it's okay. Now we need to be strategic, right? We need to be smart and intelligent in our pursuits, and because you know, with each year going up that rung of the ladder, right? We have to be intelligent in how we pursue things, right? But this is what has to take place. It has to take place that we teach our kids that resistance, you know. And they use things to deter our children. They say, well, you know, how does this sit? I was looking at Wolf Blitzer talking to a brother and trying to get him to denounce windows being broken, and he wanted him to say, well, just, you know, admit these hooligans are breaking windows. And the brother stood up. He said, look, we're not going to compare broken windows to broken spines, right? We're not going to compare, because he said, I know that those windows will be replaced and that broken spine won't, right? You can't get that life back. And so we have to let our children know exactly what they should be doing, right? We have to let our children know. When I was a child, and I appreciate, you know, the words that you shared, Sister Jaribu, but I'm proud of my elders, right? I'm proud of my elders to see that teaching me about my history and teaching me about, you know, revolutionary ideals and what we need to elevate ourselves. They saw that as an important part of nurturing me, right? And so I had the benefit of going to camps that the Malcolm X Grassroots movement would put on, Camp Pumzico, right? Camp Pumzico, and Pumzico literally means we come in peace.
That's right.
Ready to defeat.
Yes.
Ready to defeat. We're not seeking to hurt anyone,
No,
right?
no.
We're a peaceful people,
That's right.
right? And we come in peace. But when self-defense is intelligence, self-defense is intelligence. And we need to teach our children.
Whoa! I'm in church. Oh, yeah, you're right. Really. Woo! Woo! Oh, man. Okay.
Moving towards solution. First of all, it's an honor to be here. I've been waiting for about 12, 13 years for somebody besides myself and Eddie James to do a Malcolm X birthday celebration here in the city of Jackson. I've been waiting for about 12 or 13 years. So to see it happening is a blessing and a joy for myself. First and foremost, I've been commandeered by the African Art Gallery to sell a $15 Malcolm X t-shirt. Number two, I'm a member of Respect Our Black Dollar, along with Uplifting Us, along with National Black United Front, a few other organizations that I don't need to talk about. But, you know, there's a store on Beatty and Northside Drive that is just one small water drop of an example of a large ocean of economic exploitation in our community. And as you know, unfortunately, you know, we have yet to achieve what Malcolm spoke of, the message to the grassroots and ballot of the bullet in terms of a black nationalistic agenda in terms of economics. We do not control the economics of our community. And Ms. Wilson spoke about it in Movement for Black Power, that we must control our own internal markets in order for any type of sustainable revolution to be possible or realistic. And the unfortunate reality is that the professional class has not seen fit to actually want to be free. Many of them are still reproduced Negroes, black skin and white mass, what they call it, Afro-peons, you know, Negro-peons. And we still have that pedagogy of the oppressed going, colonizing and the colonizing and whatnot. I guess what I'm getting at is until we build the institutions that can provide that type of training, we're going to continue seeing the same problem. It just makes no sense why we should be in this day and age with these same problems that existed when Marvin Gaye sang about it with Mercy, Mercy Me, upgrade to Tupac, repeating the same similar themes with a little bit more curse words. You know, going back before without the curse words when you have Ida B. Wells talking about, well, let's just get up out of here since we can't be respected. And they marched all the way to Kansas in some cases, in Oklahoma. There's got to be a change that's not going to happen just with the, unfortunately, the talking. We have to be about the respecting of our black dollars. And that means that you're going to allow that dollar to rotate in your own community first and foremost. Now, Marcus Garvey said he was black first, he wasn't black owned. So there's still room to spend time with everybody else. But the first and foremost, in groups of 7 or more, we should be spending our dollars in our own communities with our own selves. And as we spend our dollars with our own selves, then we increase the opportunity for black businesses to hire who black businesses usually hire, which is who? Black people. And when black businesses hire black people, then black people have less time to commit what? Black on black crime. So I'm not against rallies and vigils. I'm not against placards, because I participate in all of that. But that is just the surface of what is needed in terms of the solution of what we would have to do collectively. And the truth be told, I don't know if everybody's at the stage where they can really, you know, peacefully spend their dollar with they self first and foremost. Now, I had a series of conversations with Eddie James related to Ferguson, and matter of fact, 2-3 years before Ferguson. And he got righteously and rightfully upset with me for castigating my elders. Because I come from the Tupac generation. See, I know what you're talking about, Brother Antar. You feel that emasculization because you don't control the economics, your elders don't control it. They don't have a solution to your problem. When you run to them, they reject you. They say that you lied or you're doing it wrong. Then you go back and check the history, and if anybody should understand, why don't they understand? Weren't they there in the 60s? Weren't they there in the 70s? No, they're damn liars. They were not there. And those who were there were not always able to be there for their families. And so there's a rejection that takes place of this movement, of what it means to be free. And most of us have not yet defined what it means to be free for our own self, much less for our institution. I got to come back to institutions. Because watching that mama run down and slap that boy on that video, on one side it made me applaud because I said, wow, the parents, you know, care. And it was good to see men and women standing side by side for the sake of what they said with their community. I was wondering why it took that to happen, but anyway. But it wasn't so good when I said, you know what? If she had been teaching him what Lumumba was teaching, if she had been teaching him maybe Ida B. Wells or Garvey or even Khalid Abdul Muhammad was teaching, he probably would have, you know, had a different approach. She probably would have had a different approach to that whole situation. Maybe they would have been trying to control the economics of their community, perhaps, as opposed to being dependent in their own community. We have enough models and enough examples to be free if we truly want to be. If you don't know what they are, he can show you. I can show you right here in Mississippi and across these United States, a small black community that have learned and set up models of economic community control. But if you want to do the same thing the same way and expect a different result by jumping up and down, begging for a vote, having your hand out, begging for somebody to give you something, or crying with a placard, marching around the store so they can get off the corner after selling dope next to a school. Let's just keep doing the same thing the same way. We could be here 20 years later, clapping for our elders and our ancestors who are working to be defeated.
Any other questions? I mean, there's a lot to touch on those 2 points, but any other questions anybody want to get to before we go deeper in that?
I apologize my ignorance. I would like to ask a question about to improve my knowledge. So I don't know who ask from you. I consider all of you can give information about it. So I would like to ask, comparing Malcolm X versus other African American leaders previous to him, like in the beginning of the 20th century, 1920s, 1930s, and at the same time, like 50s, 60s, compared Malcolm X against versus other African American leaders and African American leaders, working class movement leaders. What you consider his main contributions, and maybe his, if he has any shortcomings, to be in critical side, and what would be his positive and negative aspects that he brought?
Malcolm, sir?
Yeah, Malcolm, I don't think it's a necessarily, just to jump in on it, it's a comparison piece. I think it's best to look at Malcolm as a summation of those contributions that have been made basically from the 1890s to his life. He was a great synthesizer of different ideologies and viewpoints within our movement, even synthesizing things far beyond what his primary teacher, if you would, Elijah Muhammad, beyond what he had taught, because he had a foundation that was outside of Elijah that sometimes people miss, but it was no accident in some regard that he found himself in the Nation of Islam, which in many respects borrowed very heavily from the Universal Negro Improvement Association, the African Civilizations League, better known as the Garvey movement. Both of his parents were organizers in the Garvey movement. And before that, at least I know on his mother's side, she was part of what was called, her family had been part of the African Redemption movement. So there was a long line of things and a long line that he had came from that laid a foundation both politically and ideologically for Malcolm to grow upon. And then I think he added on it through his direct life experience.
Yes.
Right, where there was, life dealt him a hard hand. He had to deal with that. He spent some time in prison. He spent time, hustling on the streets. And he brought all that in terms of an analysis and in terms of reality that a lot of folks who had been more formally college educated and had either went into the pulpit or went into the political wing, they couldn't necessarily bring or relate to. Right, and so he had both that formal education, but he also had the street communication and the worker education a lot of other people didn't have. So he was able to really do a lot of synthesizing. So it's not necessarily that Malcolm contributed a lot of new ideologically and politically. That wasn't necessarily his contribution in many respects. And why do I say that? Most folks don't know that the house Negro, field Negro, that's something that Paul Robeson used to use.
That's right.
Right? He picked that up from Paul. He picked up a number of other things from Paul. A lot of the things in terms of his oration around understanding where the African continent was and where the revolutionary nationalist movement on the continent were heading. Those are things he picked up from Carlos Cooks and from Elon Bay Brad, who were quite, in some respects, his rivals on the corner in Harlem. And they all used to do the oration and learn from each other, stealing tricks from each other. And, he said that, or he could run that cadence. So we don't know a lot of times the history is written, so there's one individual who's kind of stands out, but you got to remember that there exists a sea where they're picking up from each other and learning and fighting each other, right? In some respects, either sometimes very peacefully in terms of, making the cream rise to the top, or sometimes, against each other's interests, right? So it's good. I think you got to put Malcolm in that kind of context. But I think the thing that Malcolm, one of the things I think Malcolm does not get credit for, which I always, try to point out, most people know Malcolm as a great orator, and people think that was his contribution. Right. I want everybody to look at Malcolm X as an organizer, right? from when he joined the Nation of Islam, it was basically maybe about 4,000 or 5,000 people. When he was expelled, that was more than that. When he was expelled, the organization had over 500,000 people. And more folks who were influencing and within his orbit, right? Who he had moved on and he had an influence on. That was within a 12-year period where he created, I think it was over 60 miles throughout the country. He created the Muhammad Speaks newspaper. He helped to establish several businesses, Shabazz businesses and farms, some of which used to operate down here in Mississippi. So these are things that he did that are not in that kind of public purview, which laid the basis for him to, when he got up in Harlem, there was not just sharp rhetoric, there was actual material force and reality that he had to back him, and not just the fruit of Islam, but people could look at his model and his example and say, they got something going. Something's right about what they're doing. I want to follow that and be a part of that. So we got to look at that. And then I think the other critical thing that Malcolm had, he internationalized the struggle at a very critical time when a part of what had taken place in the 1950s, there was kind of a Faustian bargain that got struck with the upper echelons of the civil rights leadership and their ability to kind of dictate and control both the pace and the terms of the compromise that was coming out of the struggle. And part of that compromise was, and you got to look at this in the context of the Cold War, right? Where the United States was in a very heated and a very active war. They weren't directly fighting each other, the United States and Soviet Union, but they was fighting every place else through proxies, basically. And in that context, the alternative, particularly for folks who were coming out of colonial bondage, the alternative that the Soviets posed looked rather inviting. And part of what was going on, if you look at earlier generations from the 20s and the 30s and 40s, a lot of our movements were far better connected internationally than they are even today. Think about that, with all the technology and everything we got going on, folks have more real and substantive relationships with India, with South Africa. Folks don't even know some of the very organizations that people praise in South Africa. There were new African folks who were at the head of starting some of that, right? And there was constant dialogue and exchange. So we had a very interrelated and interconnected history on a Pan-African level. And a lot of that got severed in the 1950s and got severed very intentionally by Black or Negro leadership, right? Intentionally cut that off because the deal was, you give me a few rights and I'll leave the international stuff to you, and the threat that implies, I'll leave that alone. Malcolm was one of the first voices to come back and say, I want to be connected to all the people throughout the world who share my common interests, be they African, be they Asian, be they indigenous, whatever. I need to connect with them and to rebuild some of those ties and allegiances that have been long hoped for but have been severed or intentionally ignored. He made a very critical contribution in that regard, particularly in 63, 64, 65. And it was kind of at that juncture that a lot of things, that the game stepped up in terms of the threat that he posed and what he represented internationally. And you find that same shift happened when King made a similar kind of shift. Not that King didn't know, so that's another thing in defense of King. Not that King didn't know. Most folks don't know, how many people here knew that King was in 1957 in Ghana at Ghana's independence celebration? And if you go look at some of his earlier speeches in 1955 and 56, he uses the word African. King did, in referring to us. He used the word African. So it wasn't like he didn't know. He kind of made some choices in accommodation to the broader thing that was around him to kind of tone some things down. But by 65, 66, it became very clear, I got to start speaking about workers' issues. I got to start speaking about international issues, and I got to start speaking about economic issues, because that's where we are getting that's the root of our oppression, not just our
Right.
skin color, but
That's
that is
right.
the root
That's
of it.
right.
And we got to deal with that. So, but any,
How old was he if he was doing all that? If he died at 39?
okay, I think when he went to Ghana, he was 27 years old, 27 years, if I remember correctly.
Mhm.
Yeah, he was right around that time.
And two more pieces to lift up and to coincide with what Khalid has just said. Malcolm's modern version of We Charge Genocide,
That's right.
where he actually brought back the type of actions before the United Nations and the international bodies that had been started by the Niagara Movement and W.E.B. Du Bois and others. Malcolm modernized that particular movement. And he also was very, very clear about grassroots organizing. He was really, really an architect in terms of organizing and reaching people who were actually the sufferers. And that's who he spent his time with. And perhaps that's because of his own background and his own history that made him intrinsically understand the plight of the sufferers, of Black sufferers. And they could listen to him and relate to him in a way that others could not. So the We Charge Genocide movement, and also his understanding and his clarity around the difference between violence and self-defense was critical. It was sharper, it was more clear, and made more sense to us than Martin Luther King's version. Because when, if you recall, when the brothers and sisters in Bogalusa took on the Klan, they asked for Dr. King to come. The Deacons for Defense asked for Dr. King to come, but Dr. King declined, saying that he couldn't come with them, although he supported them, because they used violence. Well, that was a shortcoming, because Dr. King didn't understand that our people were being slaughtered by the Klan. And if the Deacons for Defense had not stepped up, that would have been a local genocide right there in Louisiana. So Malcolm always understood and put forth the principle, as Antar said, that self-defense is, I remember it, self-defense is common sense, is one of the slogans we got from Malcolm, but certainly self-defense is intelligence. And the We Charge Genocide movement has not been duplicated. We've been back and forth to different parts of Africa. We participated in the World Conference Against Racism, but we could see the difference in the lack of zeal and the lack of even clarity that Malcolm had, and how he would have done that particular struggle differently if he had been a part of the World Conference Against Racism in Durban.
Let me just say this, and I must admit there that I actually came here with this on my mind, right? And the reason why it was on my mind is because for the first time, 2 nights ago, or maybe 3 nights ago, I saw the movie Selma. I hadn't seen it until now. And for anybody who's like asking why it took me so long to see it, I have a 1-year-old child and I hadn't seen much of anything in a long time. But in that movie, and I won't ruin it for anybody who hadn't seen it, but there's a part in there where Malcolm is having a conversation with Coretta.
Which is incorrect.
Which is incorrect. And that's what kind of got under my skin, because history, first of all, we have to know our history, and we have to be prepared when someone attempts, or there's an attempt to lie about history, right? Now, you know, the movie gave the impression that Malcolm had made a shift in his ideology more towards King.
Right.
You know, that's the impression that the movie gave, right? Now, Malcolm was very self-reflective. He was always reflective. And to answer your question, what were his shortcomings? Well, many of his shortcomings, Malcolm acknowledged, right? Malcolm, after he had an opportunity to go to the continent, he came back with a number of things that he said that, you know, he had more of a global view, right? And so that gets into what Khalid was saying about his international perspective, and what Malcolm said. See, you know, he realized that this number game is played on us, right? We're called the minority, right? We're called the minority right here in Jackson, Mississippi, right? Right here in Jackson, Mississippi, where 85% of the population looks like us, right? And not only are we told that we're the minority here in Jackson, if you look down the western part of the state, right, where all of the counties are just as black as we are, and with the exception of maybe Warren County, and it's just about 50-50, right? And then what Malcolm saw and what he learned is, well, if I look at, I'm not only am I not the minority in some place like Mississippi or in different parts of the country, right? But I'm not the minority in the world, right? Because the overwhelming majority of the people in the world are people of color, right? And if we ever unify, right? If we ever unify our struggle and understand that we have much more in common than that divides us, right? Then we'll be a powerful unit, right? And so that's when Malcolm became far too dangerous, right? And so Malcolm and Khalid did a good job of explaining that what Malcolm was a great synthesizer, and he, it's not necessarily, we appreciate the contributions of all of our ancestors that gave towards where we are, right? But he synthesized, he took from all these people. And what that movie tried to imply, and what you always have every Martin Luther King Day or every, Black History Day, is you get the same speech. I have a dream, right? Which reality, if you really knew Martin's speeches, it may have been one of his worst.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
It may have been one of his worst speeches. He gave plenty of speeches which were much better, right? And matter of fact, Harry Belafonte said, right, not long before Martin died, that what he told him, he said, listen here, Harry, we're going to win this integration struggle, this struggle against Jim Crow. He said, but I'm beginning to wonder. I'm beginning to wonder if we're not integrating into a burning house. Because he started to identify how the system was exploiting labor and exploiting working people. And so what Martin deduced is he said, if people can't be fed, right? If they can't get the right kinds of jobs, if they can't eat right, then it is senseless to walk across Mississippi fields together, right? If we can't come together on an economic level, if we can't share power and resources, then coming together on a social level really has little meaning, right? And so that's what Malcolm was saying the whole time, right? I started off my comments by saying while others were talking about gaining entry into the house of our oppressor, Malcolm was saying we needed to build our own house, right? Because until you're self-determined, right? Until you have the power to determine your own destiny, right? You're always eating out of the hands of your oppressor, right? And your oppressor can decide when to extend his hand and when to take it back, right? And so that's what Malcolm truly understood, right? And so the reality is that Malcolm had a great influence on King.
Yes. Before
King died.
That's right.
Right? And that's when King became even more of a problem, right? And so we're lied to about history. We're lied to, even if we go to the history and talk about the impact and how they complemented each other's work, King and Malcolm complemented each other, right? If you really follow the history of who King's mentor was, or who he took a lot of his teachings from, was Mahatma Gandhi, right? And they tell you about how Gandhi, was able to liberate India with nonviolence, right? Well, really, if you knew the true history, there were resistance there were other people who were bringing up resistance in India who were going to the British and saying, look, we'll go to war with this. And what they had multiple wars on many fronts going on already. And they couldn't afford to go to war, right? They couldn't afford. They were fighting in Kenya with the Kikuyu Nation, and they were fighting all over, right? And so they realized that they couldn't do it, right? And so they said, well, you know what? It'd be a lot easier if we say, this guy Gandhi, we've had a shock to our conscience, we've had an epiphany. We'll recognize him, right? Because, and one true thing in that movie, the movie Selma, where you had, what's the president?
Clinton. That's right, Elvin Johnson.
He's saying, look, we can't have this militant stuff with Malcolm. We can't have these black militants, right? Because that's the true threat. That's the true threat. And you know what Malcolm said? Malcolm said, what one of the worst things they ever taught me in that white man's history. That's what he said, right? He said, they taught me about Paul Revere, right? And he said, they say that resistance doesn't go anywhere. He said, but what Paul Revere and them did was when they had a struggle, when they had problems, they took arms and they took it to the British, right? And he said they were fighting about the price of tea. And he said, brothers and sisters, you have a lot more to be angry about than the price of tea, right? That's what he said. That's what he said. So he got an understanding. He got a global perspective, but he was a great synthesizer, and he he saw, as he developed, he started to see the struggle as just more than, for us, it's just more than Jackson, Mississippi, right? We have to understand, how this is a global struggle that we're dealing with. It's a global struggle. And I'll edge this in, right? Watch how I move this in, right? I'm gonna bring my father into this, right? When my father, he was talking to a lot of revolutionaries, right? The Jaribu Hills and stuff like that, right? But when he decided to run for mayor, right? People were saying, well, brother, how you gonna be about revolution fixing potholes, right? How is that?
Not me though.
Yeah, not you. How does fixing potholes? Because you have some people who have been very hard line against using electoral politics to move our struggle forward, right? And for different reasons. We got different strategies in the movement, right? And so what he began to understand, right, is that what you have to do is you may start on a conversation about potholes, right? But then what you do is you connect pothole to pothole. And community to community. So people in Jackson, Mississippi, and people in Shreveport, Louisiana, and people in Oakland, California, and people in Detroit, Michigan can understand why that same potholes in each one of their communities, right? And it's because neither one of them control the resources in their community. Neither one of them make the decisions about when a pothole will get fixed, right? And so once you do that, you broaden the discussion, right? You start at a very simple place, and you're able to broaden the discussion to get a greater understanding of what connects us, and so we can unify and understand that we are in a much better, we're in a position of strength when we really understand all that connects us.
Yes.
So one thing, just to move us to more dialogue, my time is short. But the question that was asked, I think is a good question, but it moves us to another piece that Brother David had brought up. And why I was focusing on the synthesis, because in the here and now, and in the past, there's a great deal of political and ideological struggle that takes place within our movement. And it has to take place. So we have to engage with clarity, synthesize the best ideas, eliminate the BS, and then move forward on that basis. But we have to recognize that there are winners and losers in that political and ideological struggle. I would argue that part of the present malaise that we find ourselves in is because some of the wrong strategic decisions were made and the wrong compromises were made. Going back not to the 1960s, but going back even earlier. And we still got to fight and argue those things out in the present. That's what particularly that I think is the third question. The first and the third question really are trying to address, right? Because you have an emerging movement, and I say emerging because there's still some things around it reaching both a qualitative and a quantitative level that it still hasn't got there yet. We hope that it gets there, right? What's going on with what I'm talking about is what many people are calling the Ferguson resistance or the Black Lives Matter moment or movement, right?
What is that word?
Which
Trying to read. Could you read number 3?
Of the things that we need to demand, are we demanding enough? Are our demands too reformist and not structural and systemic enough?
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Now let me point it out, then I want to open it up. Because this is how the game gets played. And for a younger generation, it gets played because a lot of folks either were not taught the right information about their history, or some combination of it wasn't presented to them in a way in which that they could relate to it, or some combination of both, right? And so many people are applauding from things I saw was it yesterday or today? Maybe even, it was yesterday. Many people are applauding this decision that Obama made to quote unquote not give the police more military equipment. As if that was a major structural transformation or structural change. That's just a mere reform. The political and ideological struggle that I would want to say we need to get to is, how do we get to a place where we no longer have police And there's no longer a need for police, and particularly for us to be police in the way that we are police. So how do we move to that point and not get stuck on whether they got body cameras or not? You know, because all the body camera we already seen, they can photograph you in much more detail, you getting killed and nothing gets done about it, right? Or very little happens. So we can't get stuck on the okie doke, but it's our political and ideological lens which will lead us to greater clarity, right? As opposed to confusion and being, you know, subtracted by the minor things. And I'm not saying that the minor things shouldn't be struggled on. Don't get me wrong on that. Because sometimes you got to win that minor thing to be able to build enough strength to get to the major thing, right? So it's not just being totally against reform. I'm not saying that. You got to struggle for things in a revolutionary way so that it gets from point A to point B to where you actually need to go. But we can't, I would argue, if we don't have certain debates about clarity, what David said, what do we really agree upon as to what freedom is? What do we want? And what do we need? And those are two different things. And what are we willing to sacrifice? So I want to open it up for comments, questions from folks here.
Good point.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Well.
Can you stand up, sister? I'm sorry.
I'm
I
glad to
see you.
stand.
Yeah.
I'm glad to stand.
Sunshine.
You know, unless we become community for real, and I'm talking about insofar as land mass is concerned, we're really beating a dead horse. It's not going anywhere. We really need to start trying to pontificate some ideas that can get us on some piece of property somewhere where we can start sharing community with one another, protecting each other. You know, people of like minds. You know, that's, to me, you know, are we willing to let go of our $200,000, $300,000 pieces of property? You know, hot and cold water. Like, this room is hot right now. I'm not dying. You know, things like that. Cable TV, so that we can start educating from the ground up. And I don't mean the young kids. We really need to start with the older people. They are the root of our problem. Young kids are not running anything. They're really not. They are the future. But we have some grown people who do not know their history, period. All you have to do is have and most of us are like that because we were given a lot of trickery back in the 60s and prior to. And the awakening came around the 50s and the 60s. But a lot of people rejected the awakening because they wanted to fit in, just like a lot of us want to fit in now. You know, how many of us are willing to even do what the Chinese just finished doing years ago? Maybe we need to let go of some of our petroleum-powered vehicles and ride some bikes and slim down. You know, we're going to have to start thinking outside the box. For this generation, it really wasn't outside the box for our elders. We need to start reflecting on the things that did work for us. You know, we have a lot of cleaning up to do. And we got to tear down so we can build up.
Any comments?
I want to go back there and talk.
I'll be brief. I'll be brief. Well, first of all, sister, what you're talking about is free the land. That's what free the land means. You know, free the land.
What's that again, brother?
That's what free the land means. Now, there's some people who've been yelling it, and I'm certain they didn't have no idea what it meant. But free the land is a reparations crime, right? It's really saying that land is the source of community. It's the source of how we could produce wealth. It's the source of how we produce culture. You know, all of those things, right? And so we need land that is our own, right? And so what Kali was saying, basically understanding what may be some of our short-term goals and what about our long-term goals. Our short-term goals may be respecting the black dollar, right? Our long-term goal is to make the black dollar a black dollar, right? That it is a currency that we control, a currency that is ours, right? Because so long as it isn't, right, we're really pigeonholed to who controls that currency, right? We don't control that, right? We don't control the markets. We don't control, well, in some regard, we don't control the value of that dollar, right? And so we have to understand that we need to control our own. We have to control our own.
Can I say just one more thing?
This
It
is
just
here.
came to my mind when you were speaking, that was listening to a documentary. And the documentary was about, you know, what wealth really is and how you really accumulate wealth and or sovereignty. The two equal each other. Sovereignty is wealth, wealth is sovereignty, right? And I got to thinking about it. How did the people who bought us here on the ships acquire their wealth? Some people would say it's the gold, you know, accumulation of gold, because that's what the dollar is based on. I totally disagree. You know how the wealth of this country was accumulated? Free labor.
That's right.
I'm sitting
We
down
ain't
now.
looking for
And I'm sorry,
We
but I
ain't
have
looking
to
to do
add to that. I have to add to that. We look at the capitalist economic structure as superior and it's great booming. The reality is that capitalism hasn't succeeded for any other nation
That's right.
like it has the United States. The United
Because
States
of the opening.
is a unique model because it's the only model that had hundreds upon hundreds of years of free labor. So anything you put in place after, you know, hundreds upon hundreds of years of free labor,
Thank you.
you know, will succeed.
Absolutely.
But I
Question
think it's
here from
The
the
sister here. This sister.
Well, I just wanted to touch on several points. You mentioned Damu earlier.
Yes.
And this kind of leads back to something that this sister spoke on. One of the things, I went on an environmental tour some years ago with Damu in New Orleans, and one of the things that he emphasized was not accepting government grants. So in these many layers, you know, as we peel them back, right now, you see a bunch of different organizations that are here to help our communities, and, you know, they're here, they have their causes, and we're gonna save the people. It's really a numbers game, you know, no tangible results with the majority of them. Fortune 501c3s, as a friend of mine calls them. That was just another trick bag thrown into the game to dismantle true community building. So a lot of us get caught up in that. You know, as we look for the dollar, that's why you see organizations open this year and close the following year. They didn't even do what they need to do. Once they got hold of their one mighty grant, got what I needed, phew, gone. So I say that to say this, as we talk about what one particular thing will make it, there is no one particular thing. As you spoke on the compartmentalization and labelization of so many things, that's another thing that creates divide. Environmental justice, is it social justice, is it, you know, what is it? That's a compartmentalization of human justice, which falls under human rights. It's all the same things, each person just playing their part to get to it, but because we fall under the government systematic structures, it's just a further divide. So I guess for me, a question would be, how do we tear down those walls to get to a main focus in order to begin true community rebuilding and development?
Y'all remember?
We've had it before. Look at Tulsa, Oklahoma, and it's right. Fear, how can we tear down that fear that comes when every time we build something, it's torn down? So that's implemented. You know, it's a mind thing. So how can we overcome the fear in order to get to something that is unknown to most of us?
Well, I want to answer the first part because I came here to talk about it. And we sat in the car, almost just picking up Kylie's children talking about it. And Mr. Figures and I were talking about it. One of the important things this sister raises is the 501c3 system. We got to deal with that. And we got to deal with the fact that the money that's being dispersed and distributed is not being distributed to those of us who are trying to change the world any longer. The money is earmarked for those who are willing to play the game and give the rest of us up. I can't tell you the number of times that a funder has said to me, wow, I wish I'd known about your work. So-and-so said that you all weren't doing any organizing, or so-and-so said this, that they're getting ready to do what you're doing. It is really a divisive tool. It's destroying our movement. And I'll take it on, I'll say that as a self-criticism, when I think back over my 40-year history, the part that I am ashamed of is the fact that there was a period when the money was coming in. We were the flavor of the month. Black Workers Center, Mississippi Workers Center for Human Rights in Mississippi. We were the flavor of the month, although it didn't last long, but it lasted long enough for us to become delusional about money and about getting grants. Now, we were not the gatekeeper ilk because a revolutionary was running things, okay? But the gatekeeper ilk is a dangerous ilk. They don't just take the money. They lock the gate after they get theirs. So we have to deal with leadership. And fake ass leadership has to be unpacked. But see, let me tell you why we don't deal with it. A lot of us have jobs with these folks, and we don't want to be terminated. We don't want to be retaliated against. We don't be fired. Don't want to be like Jaribu. Someone even said this to somebody. And look, you can go out there with Jaribu if you want to and run your mouth. You're going to be like Jaribu. No grants, no money, and struggling and starving. Have you ever seen, look at my size 12 self. Do I look like I'm starving? I ain't never going to starve. Let me tell you something. Because I can roll out the sheepskin in the back seat because people died for me to get the sheepskin. I can practice law in the back of my car. I can sing like a nightingale. I don't have to worry about becoming a capitalist whore. So those who do, see, the problem is these are people we consider to be friends, but once you start to see the betrayal, once you start to see what they're up to behind your back, then you got to go into a different mode. See, you can't act like they're the same people that you thought they were. You got to start, and you got to deal with these funders who come into our community and cherry pick these people who are willing to play it safe and obey, and give them the resources that they can write off their taxes. And they're lying and saying they're doing a good deed, they're helping, they are cultivating and developing poverty pimps. Study the movement, please. Every leader, every revolutionary we've mentioned, none of them had 501c3 dollars. I remember when Fannie Lou Hamer was trying to dismantle the colonial scheme in the Mississippi Delta. How did she do it? She did it through revolutionary celebrities like Harry Belafonte. And of course, Sidney Poitier was not a revolutionary, but he was dragged, kicking and screaming by his famous actor friend, Harry. So she had people coming on a landfill, plopping money down on the runway to give her resources to carry on. She didn't have the 501c3. And do you know there was a book that came out, The Revolution Will Not Be Funded? And it talked about the 501c industrial complex. And do you know that the book and the conference were funded by one of those carpetbagger funders? I couldn't believe it. When the person said, oh, yeah, that's one of my programs. I am the program officer. I said, damn, they talking about you. You know, but this is what we need to get to right here in Jackson. The reason why I see it so pronounced in Jackson is because now y'all are the flavor of the month. The Scruffball, Mississippi Delta, where my parents are from, even to some of you, has never been the flavor of the month. But right now, Jackson is the flavor of the month. So beware of people organizing behind our backs and stealing resources, coming into our communities as self-appointed, self-anointed. I don't care if you knew them a couple of years ago and you thought they were cool, you had dinner with them, you went out to lunch with them. They're not cool anymore. They are destroying us. And we got to put a stop to, we got to stop our own bleeding. That's why I stood up, because your comments are so relevant. Nobody wants to unpack that 501c3 piece. We got to unpack that. We got to deal with where we get our resources from and who holds our resources hostage. And I believe in reparations to the point where if there is some carpetbagger money, and you talking about you coming in to organize Black workers, don't even think about bringing in some Negro handkerchief heads or some other color handkerchief heads that you think you can manipulate and get them to push people out. We've been doing this work a long time. You can't push us out. And we are Scruffball, and we're ready to take you on. You cannot push us out. See, you can't be cute anymore. You can't be polite with this stuff when it comes. You can't just grab a quick grant and then think, oh, they'll include others. They're not going to include others. And if you take the money without conditions, then you're just as wrong. So this sister's point has to be heeded to, because we are dealing with that right now. We're seeing examples of folks calling themselves coming in to organize in places where we've been putting our noses to the grindstone, where we've been working and organizing. And now the fruits of our labor being exploited once again. And I don't care if they look like us. Clarence Thomas looks like you. Condoleezza Rice looks like you. But what does that mean? We learned a long time ago, skin nationalism don't work for us. Nationalism works, but not skin nationalism.
Now, I wanted before, thank you, Drew.
I really didn't mean to go there. You shouldn't have asked that question. You shouldn't have asked that question. And I'm glad we're streaming live. I'm glad we're streaming live too.
We're gonna hear somebody who hasn't talked this year.
Yeah.
Okay, I wanted to get back to, are our demands too reformist and not structural and systemic enough? I wanted to talk about number 3, and the second part of that question, which is, are our demands too reformist and not structural and systemic enough? I wanted to piggyback in on what you were saying about the whole nonprofit scheme. The challenge that I have working in a nonprofit, very short-lived. I'm gonna tell my sister.
We're not gonna stone you, sister. It's all
Oh,
right.
no, we all went through
We
it.
had
sister.
this, we had a big meeting with the Mississippi Coalition. And everybody from every funder and nonprofit you can imagine in Mississippi was there, the substantive ones. And everybody kept pushing the problem. And it was like, we know what the problem is. We know we're having disciplinary problems in school. We know that children are not being treated with dignity and respect in school. Greater still, we know that our children are being miseducated and uneducated.
That's right.
Okay? So the problem I have with nonprofits is that they go in their movement to a point, and then if you're not an analytical thinker, if you're not a critical thinker, you miss the whole mark, because you're deluded in thinking that, oh yeah, well they're here to help us, and they're gonna free us, and they're gonna do this, and they're gonna do that. But it's not so much what they're saying, it's what they aren't saying. But you have to be able to think and synthesize that information and apply that information and say, well, it's not so much what they are saying. Well, what aren't they saying? Because what they aren't saying is really what we need to hear.
Right.
But if you're not a thinker and you can't read between the lines and see that there's something else with what they are trying to say without saying it, but you have to fill in the blanks, that infuriates me, because people go to meetings and they meet and they talk and they talk and they meet and they vent and they complain and they moan and they groan and they leave and nothing gets done. And it's because they missed the whole point, which was we have to educate ourselves. And we have to educate and lift up a generation of thinkers who can hear what you're saying, understand what you're not saying, and fill in the blanks. See, the nonprofits aren't gonna do it for you. They're under contract. They can't say it. They can't come out and just tell you that this is what's really happening. This is what is really going on. And so my question is, how can we talk about true reform without talking about an educational reform and what that really looks like for us? From the crib to the home, to the schoolhouse, to the community. What does that really look like, and how do we raise up thinkers? Because until we understand truly how to think and how to solve complex problems, how to analyze and come up with complex solutions, unless we have another Malcolm who can just, and another Shockway who just, hey, this is it. If I gotta, the Bible talks about Jesus said he couldn't feed believers everything at once. He had to put it in morsels and in ways that they could consume and digest it and use it. But how do we do that so that we raise up a nation of African American thinkers? Because if we don't teach ourselves how to think, how are we going to come up with these complex solutions to these? Because it's a complex enigma on top of a paradigm on top of a cone.
Yeah.
So that's my thing, and I want us to talk about reform and structural and systemic change.
Yeah, I wanted to speak just really briefly, and it's interesting, you mentioned that meeting, which we were not invited to. With our track record of 18 years in the state doing this work, we were not invited. And there's a reason why certain organizations and individuals connected to those organizations are locked out completely. And I urge people not to think of it as a point of privilege, but to question the invitation and the acceptance of an invitation. And you look around the room and you see that it is just void of folks who are ready to take the next step. So the revolution is not going to be funded. It's just true. We got to study movements. We got to go back to the way people funded their movements before the 501c3 system. Life before the 501c3 system. Revolutionary life. Progress in our movement before. That could be something that some of these graduate students take on as their dissertation and do some research about how organizations resource themselves before. Membership organizations where people paid their dues. Mississippi Immigrants' Rights Alliance is an excellent example. Poor brothers and sisters who came to this country seeking not the pot of gold, because they weren't trying to come to be exploiters. They were running away from exploitation. And what did they find when they got here? But even with that, they developed a culture of paying dues into their organization to keep it going, to keep it alive. If we weren't so busy being spoiled by the 501c3 money and seeing the donations coming in as just icing on the cake, instead of really going after the real cake, which is support from the community, that's where we need to go back to. Not even go back to, but go to. Go to that where we are self-reliant. So if a grant comes in, well, I'll be damned. We got a grant. Okay, put it in one of those money markets. We don't really need it because we got the people's movement and a trust established by our people. But to do that, we have to have trust. You know, when the Black United Fund started, do you know Negroes said, oh no, I'm with the United Way, I'm with the American Red Cross. I already have money taken out of my check. You had to educate them to the importance of letting your money come out for the Black United Fund, which was a fund that was funding Black organizations. And that funding stream died and dried up because we didn't support it, because we were not self-determining. But it could come back around again in many different configurations. The Cooperation Jackson. I went to New York City. I was on a site visit. I couldn't believe it. I told the sister I was from New York. I was from Mississippi. She said, oh yeah, I know Kali and them. They're doing the same thing in Jackson. And I just stuck my chest out. I said, yeah, Cooperation Jackson. And she was doing the same thing in New York. And we were doing a site visit at her facility. And it was just so inspiring to know that the connections being made. That's the kind of connections we need to make. So we are self-reliant, okay? So we are self-reliant. If you need a people's lawyer to go somewhere quick and represent you because the police whooped you upside your head or killed your child, where right now, Alita and the other sisters who are working around Marissa Alexander's case, they need lawyers and we don't have the money to go down and help them, right? So what if we had a fund, a freedom fund, where lawyers, revolutionary lawyers, could be deployed to take care of the business of defending our people? But instead, we got a mindset that often tells us, oh, I better go with, what's the guy who comes on the air all the time? Richard Schwartz. Oh, Richard Schwartz. And that kills me when I see that brother singing the blues and he comes and puts the dollar in his case. I just want to go through the TV at that point. But I'm just saying, self-reliance is something easy. If we study how it was done before, we can come out of the situation where we're tokens at their table. And believe you me, just before dessert is served, they're gonna snatch your fork and your knife, and you ain't gonna have no dessert. So you thinking you in the heyday now, I'm telling you, I'm a witness to it. Don't do like we did. Don't be so comfortable with that funding that you don't automatically start to think about, not plan B, but your plan A should be self-determination and self-reliance. I take that on, I criticize. That's a legacy issue that I'm concerned about. That I didn't do it then, but I'm damn sure working on it now.
No, you got it there.
Well, it's excellent. I'm a student of economics, and so for me, as we talk about resources and where this will eventually trying to go, I think one of the fundamental things that we have kind of not been educated enough on, or I guess, an opportunity that's basically staring us in our face. And I kind of want to say to Corporation Jackson and directly to you, Ms. Hill, actually all your panelists and Joan, Kathy, and others here in the audience. We really need a coming together of understanding of what makes up the African-American disposable income. Because we find ourselves, this is the choir, I consider this the choir, we find ourselves having this conversation over and over and over again. So what are we gonna do? What are we gonna do? Make it right. And we're smart, we know better. We know what our situation is before integration, we know what our situation is after integration. And so as a student of the game, banking and finance, it bothered me that we as a race of people were spending $500 to $800 billion a year in this country. Yet we hover at the bottom or near the bottom of the economic parity pole. So that's akin to me giving my brother here $1 million last year, and the year before that, and the year before that, and every year he's coming for me to give him $1 million. Well, we know what it is. It's what he's doing with it. That's right. So if we know that, then we should be doing something better or something different. And our institutions, we talked about, and our strongest institution, the one we love the dearest, which is our church. Yes. Okay? And historically speaking, when you start following these dollars, I can tell you there's probably maybe 3 or 4 people maybe in this room who know what makes up the African-American disposable income, those product accounts. I couldn't sleep until I really spent hours, weeks, months, research, till I developed a white paper. And I've developed that formula. Now, I'm not saying it because I beat myself on the chest, because it's based on the gross domestic product and the capitalist society in which we live in. It is what it is. I didn't come up with it. But I developed it so that we can understand and understand why we're still in the position that we're in. We can't put $12 million a week in our churches, cash money every Monday morning over in a white bank and expect somehow that's going to help our community. Okay, now people can put their money wherever they want to do. So, since we know better, now what are we going to do? My challenge, my question, my request is that Corporation Jackson takes a leadership role of fulfilling one of the conversations I used to have and encourage to follow all the time. All the time. His determination for self-sufficient economic empowerment for African Americans was prolific. It was always profound. And I always used to have this give and take all the time here. And I said, well, how you gonna fund it? I said, now, it'll get there, but I won't see it. My son won't see it. Okay? I like to have some hand where I am before I get to that pie in the sky. I really, really would like to have some. But what I'm saying to you is that I think that the opportunity, Antar, Corporation Jackson, why can't we now reach back to Mother Africa? Come on. Why can't we do it now? We got technology. I believe if Chokwe picked up that phone and would call Mubarak or Mugabe or the president of South Africa, they'll at least return that phone call. And we'd have that dialogue and that conversation. Because when we talk about resources, you're not going to find the resources nowhere else more plentiful than we are going to be in Africa, right? We are not going to be able in this country, guys, because we do not control our own economic resources. We don't even control our own disposable income. That's why our dollars don't turn over in our community. Now, don't get me wrong, we'll have successful projects, right? 10 of us, businesses owners, we get a merchant association. The good example you can look at is Ferry Street. White folks had nothing to do with Ferry Street now looking like it's looking right now. Not one single thing. Integration had a lot to do with it. So we're not going to be able collectively, dealing inside one of the most capitalistic society on the planet, and work to achieving the self-sufficient economic empowerment that we keep talking about. We're going to have success stories. We'll have success stories, but we're not going to have self-sufficient long-term determination where we control our own economic resources continuing down this road. So again, I go back. Let's call this International African Summit. Maybe it can't be here in America. It needs to be called. We can't sit here and say, okay, let's get all the black banks together and join in together and form one black bank. That ain't gonna happen. black insurance companies. Before integration, there may have been opportunity to do that, to pull all those resources together. We're not going to be able to move in that direction. Now, you bring it home here in the city of Jackson, where we control it. Right now today, we got $385 million sitting down there in Trustmark Bank. Any given day, in any given day, Trustmark Bank has a responsibility to this community. And when you look at their track record, even on their the CRA, the Community Reinvestment Act track record, there's nothing there. They'd rather pay the penalty. They'd rather pay the extra cost to borrow the money from the federal discount window than they would to go and do it, because they know they would lose that money in their mind if they invested it. So they'd rather pay an additional percentage point to borrow the money from the Federal Reserve Bank and take the poor report card.
Well, we are going to.
Thank you. So I want to, I guess, inform folks. So Harold put out a challenge, and it's a good one. But I think folks should just have some information about, there was a vision, there was a plan, there were steps to execute part of the plan that you mentioned. And we faced a hiccup, not an insignificant one, but a hiccup. You know, Chokwe passing was a hiccup. But we got to look at it in some respects also as an opportunity. Why do I say that? You know, sometimes you can have false victories in having the kind of the weight of the city and what many people think that comes with that, either locally and internationally, without recognizing the city and municipal governments are very limited. And if you're not clear about what you're really going to do with that office, you're kind of playing yourself. So I think we had some realistic expectations of what we could do and what we understood that office to be about. And part of it is that the mayor's role is really a facilitator, right? And part of what we were trying to do, and something that was set up, we had already planned on doing an African center in Quintro. That was already in the works and was planned, and it was initially something that we were looking at for 2016. So, and what that is in Quintro's, you know, what a lot of folks don't know, at least the past, I would say 20, 25 years, some of the leading forces in the Pan-African world have been in South America, who've been really kind of trailblazing and keeping their torch alive. I'm talking about forces in Venezuela, I'm talking about forces in Colombia, and forces in Brazil. And if folks don't know, well, let me just do a pop quiz. Where's the fourth largest concentration of African people in the world?
Brazil.
That's the second. What's the fourth? U.S. is the third. What's the fourth? Nope. Nope.
Haiti?
Nope.
Okay, where is it?
Colombia.
Oh, wow.
Don't even think about it, do you?
Okay.
We don't even think of, we don't
It's
even
the
think
fourth
of that.
largest
The fourth
concentration of
largest
black people.
concentration of black people.
Wow.
Colombia. That means there's more people. To the number one is Nigeria. Number two is Brazil. Number three is the United States. Number four is Colombia. That means there's more African people in Colombia than a lot of other places on the continent of Africa. Now, some of this depends on how you define yourself and all that. So it's not necessarily an exact science, because race is not defined the same way everywhere. So just keep that in mind. But that said, there are a significant number of people throughout Latin America who are conscious and identify themselves as Afro-descendants who want to make some connections. One of the biggest barriers that we have is this colonial language barrier, right? Us only speaking English, most of us, when most of the people in the Western Hemisphere who are African don't speak English.
That's right, French.
That's right.
Right? Or Portuguese.
Or Wolof, or their
Yeah.
traditional language.
So the languages in America, in the Americas that you have to learn, that we got to learn, is our democratic responsibility to learn, is Portuguese, Spanish, and French, right? And because, you know, because primarily we kind of limited to the Trinidad, the Tobago, the Guyana, the Jamaica. When you got Cuba and Panama and Colombia and Venezuela and every place else in between. But all that to say, we now have the duty to build the infrastructure outside of the city government in that false pretense. Now, Cooperation Jackson is growing, but it's not sufficient enough. People don't get it wrong that we are big enough or strong enough at this point. We're only a year old, so we got time and room to grow. But we need everybody in here to be a member, because we are already somewhat, to a certain extent, beyond our real capacity of the folks who are doing it. And we have to exceed it if we're going to grow and be able to play a more defining role in determining the economy of this community.
How can people join?
People can join, it's simple. It ain't that hard, it ain't that complex. First thing is we ask everybody to go through an orientation process. It has to be some foundation education work that you understand what it is you're joining and why. So you're not just out there. You know, what work has been done, what the vision, what the mission is. You don't have to agree with everything, but there are some core pieces that you do have to agree to be a member. Then there's a membership application and a membership application fee. It's $50. And again, this is going back to what Darebo says. It's something that we will work with everybody because we know everybody don't have equal resources. Right now, Darebo's right. People in our core have heard me say that for the moment, and it's largely on some false pretenses. Let's be correct about that. A lot of people are interested because of what they think Chokwe Lumumba's electoral victory meant. They're not so much interested in the work that has to happen in the trenches on a day-to-day basis that either happened before or is going to have to happen now, right, and into the future. So it's just this, you know, there's this mystification of winning electoral politics that so many people, even on the left and progressive forces, have, that it neglects the other work that has to happen in transforming people's minds and getting them organized. That's the real work that we're going to have to do. So right now we are a little bit of flavor of the month, but we understand that ain't going to last long. That ain't going to last too long at all. So ultimately we're going to have to be self-reliant, and that's what we're trying to work to, because I've been through this game enough to know the resources are going to run dry sometime soon. And then what institutional things do you have to weather that storm? So it wasn't a coincidence that we bought this building with the little resources that we have, right? Not rented no building, bought. And anything that we try to buy it outright. Ain't trying to rent, ain't trying to get no mortgage, buy it outright, you know, while you can get it, right? So there's a reason that we did that. But to get to that piece, we have to work ourselves into that position to be able to relate to the rest of the hemisphere and to Africa. We are already connected to a lot of folks who want to do trade and want to do business with us in the wider cooperative world, all throughout the world. They're just waiting on us to develop product. So we have to get to that stage. And that's something that you got to work yourself up to. We're getting to that point, but we're not there yet. The more folks that we can build and build our capacity through in terms of joining, the faster we can get there. And there's some pressure for us to move fast. Why do I say that? This community is slated for gentrification and displacement. You know, capital is always looking for new fields to invest, and part of that investment is you got to destroy what exists there first to be able to then build something over to increase the value, but it's built upon them destroying our community and divesting from it systematically over decades in the first place, right? To make this a cheap landscape for which they can then come in and build and buy from. This community is slated for that. The driving engine is in part this medical complex in this corridor. So the clock is ticking on us, y'all. If we want Jackson to remain Black politically controlled, and then have that political control, at least in some aspects of our lifetime, translated into economic control, which we don't have yet in this city, despite the 85% population. We don't have that. We get nowhere near that. And despite the majority of elected leadership. So we got to work on transforming that. We got a little bit of time. So we under the gun. And folks need to understand that. That's why we encourage folks to join, you know, and help us do that. Because the critical thing that I think when the commentator asked the question about the contribution. One of the critical contributions, and I don't think we talked about it enough, but there's rarely enough time to talk about everything. Malcolm was also clear about talking about what the alternative was, right? Him saying, who are they to be equal to? Why do you want to integrate into a burning house He wasn't just saying that to just reject something else. He was saying, but there's another thing that you can build for yourself if you choose to. Right? If you choose to. And then the example that he had, there were some models that here's, you know, it wasn't called the Nation of Islam for no reason. And so there were things that they were working towards building and made some tangible success on in his lifetime. So the lessons are there. We got to build upon it. And we got to be clear about it. And so we need to, when folks leave here, start thinking about that alternative. Because so it's one thing for us to criticize the nonprofit industrial complex, and all the criticism I heard tonight is right. But we got to realize we exist in a global capitalist society in which, now I want you to think about this hard, because it points to a cold reality that sometimes we don't face. If half of us wasn't working for nonprofits, we wouldn't have a job anyway, because there ain't no jobs out there. No, that's damn near everybody, not just in Jackson, right? So the nonprofits have exploded in a particular way because the capitalist system is run to a certain kind of dead end on its own cycle of production. And largely the stuff about the nonprofit industrial complex, we exist off of another division of finance capital. Not on what is actually producing in the real world, but on the speculation that these foundations then reap and then distribute so they can keep playing the game. But if this didn't exist, more of us would be in prison. Now, I'm not saying that to praise it. I'm not saying that to perpetuate it. I'm saying that to say that it gives you a clear reason to start building the alternatives. That's the reason I'm pointing it out. We got to build the alternatives.
And the reality is, just to add to what Khalid has said, the reality is that only 1% of the nonprofit money goes to organizations led by Black people. It's pathetic. It really is. Organizations led by white people who say they're going to do Black or brown work get way more money than Black people who organize themselves and write a grant. That's one thing. And the other thing, I still say study movements go back to when there was no 501c3 system. I disagree that there is no money because church, every Sunday morning, they put the money in the plate, okay? And the pastor is able to stay in his house. The pastor is able to drive his car. He don't have to go out and get a job in a lot of these larger churches. My daddy was a Baptist preacher. He never had any other job except preaching. So I'm saying that there needs the last, in my opinion, in terms of marching. We have not had one march, not one Black Lives Matter march, not anything massive like we should be having. You remember when Malcolm used to be on the street corners, and you can look at footage from Eyes on the Prize and other films, and you'll see Malcolm every Saturday morning on 125th Street speaking. Where are our street corner speakers? We are good at that. We need to be out there engaging our people on Saturday morning and collecting support money to keep these movements going. That's where the trust thing comes in. You don't ask for money right away. You connect with people. You build relationships first, and then you say, okay, how are we gonna make the nation rise? It was a slogan. How are we gonna make the Black nation rise? Not through 501c3 dollars. And yes, this building is owned now by our brothers and sisters. It's our building, okay? But it can't run on air. And there is not going to be the same availability of resources because the mission for these foundations has changed ever since the World Conference Against Racism. That's when we first started to lose resources because we challenged the US government for its failure to address its race problem and participate meaningfully. We had demonstrations every day in solidarity with other people from other countries who had issues with the United States. That's when the loyalty clauses came into play. Certain foundations had you sign a loyalty clause because we were a stepchild of this one particular organization. We slipped through the cracks and we were never asked to sign it. But everybody I know who wanted to keep that grant signed the loyalty clause, saying that they would never go against the United States government. Do you know how dangerous that is? Remember HUAC, House of Un-American Activities? Remember the McCarthy era? Dangerous when they tell you if you talk a certain way, if you speak a certain way, if you resist a certain way. Now you notice, look at the landscape. Look at the nonprofits that are involved here in Mississippi. No demonstrations, no outcry, nothing except convenings. We need to get back in the streets, and we don't need a nonprofit system to tell us that. We don't need a foundation to tell us that. But we need to be out among our people, speaking truth to power and developing and cultivating leaders, young leaders who are ready to speak, but they don't have a platform. We need to provide them with the platform and be energized on these street corners in the worst areas. But we organized in Newark. We went to the worst areas. We went to Central Ward where junkies were nodding. Literally, as we were talking to some of the people, there were drug addicts who were victims of the heroin epidemic. But they were nodding out there, and while they were nodding, we did a play called Junkies Are Full of Shh. We broke into Revolutionary Theater right there on the street on a flatbed truck, and we sang freedom songs, and we organized people who were at the lowest edge of life. That's what we got to get back to. I am really worried about the corporate appearance of our struggle. The corporate appearance of our struggle, the safe appearance of our struggle is too safe. We should have been out in the streets. That commemoration at Jackson State for Gibbs and Green, I didn't even know about it until it was put up on Facebook after the fact. How can somebody in Greenville who's a revolutionary not know what's happening in Jackson? We need a tighter understanding and stop the tribalism, where if you're not from Jackson, you don't hear about what's happening in our nerve center. This is our nerve center. This is the largest concentration of our people, and we need to make sure everybody's in the loop. We need to support Cooperation Jackson because they're on to something that many of us have been a part of for a long time, socialist thought, right? Cooperative economics, Ujamaa. That is where we need to be, and we have to support them. We got to give our dollars to them, and we got to support it because that's a place where we'll be able to come when we can't go anywhere else. And if we don't support them, they're not going to be here. And there are other organizations too. I would lift them up, except it would sound like it's self-serving, but you know we're out here. And you know that we are struggling, and you know we're trying to remain true, and we are determined not to sell out. But you know everybody got to eat. I don't know about the $300,000 house. I can't pay for my $87,000 one. So those who living in houses is anyway, so the bank owns it. So you're still renting, you're just a higher level of renting because you got a little equity, but really you're still a renter. So for all of us out there, we need to really think about how can we be out there. I listen to these brothers, these young brothers, and my mentor and my teacher. Boy, this stuff should be published. I'm telling you, this is teaching. The history lesson you laid out, the history lesson that was laid out. It sounds like what Chokwe put forward in the Black Scholar in 1981. We need to make sure that this is a class being taught in our community on the street corner, teaching classes on the street corner. We don't really need a structure. We can stand out there, get some good sound equipment, and be roving, be in a different county every month. 82 counties, we should cover them all. Make sure wherever our people are, we are. So I want to say support Cooperation Jackson and the Lumumba Center. It's so important for us to do that. And let's encourage, despite the setback and the betrayal, let's just keep our eyes on that victory, right? Let's keep our eyes on the mayor's office. And I know it ain't about electoral politics, but it is about state power. Okay, and that is an example. That's the closest we came to state power. And we could do it. If we could do it in Jackson, we could do it in Lauderdale County. We could do it in Washington County. Wherever we are, we can do it. But we have to really believe that we can do it and go to our people for support. I hate asking for money. Why is that? I'm a preacher's daughter. I saw the collection plate every Sunday. But me, myself, I'd rather ask for money for other people, even though the worker center rent might not get paid. You see what I'm saying? I'm worried more about other people. We need to be collectively concerned about each other. And if you hear of people starting up stuff where they have no track record, they got some 501c3 money, they're trying to put people out of business who've been working, you need to reject it because they'll come for you next. If you let them close the Cooperation Jackson or the Mississippi Worker Center or Mirror, okay, they're gonna come for you next. And we won't be, we'll still be around because we'll be organizing out the car. We've been down And then we've been all the way up and we've been down. So I can do both. I turned down beds. I've typed for people. I've done a number of jobs. This ain't my first or only job. But for those who are spoiled and used to, only having one little cushy piece, I feel sorry for you. I feel bad for you, but I can sweep, I can vacuum, I can turn down beds and clean toilets if need be, and work out of my truck because it's paid for. It ain't gonna last much longer. It's 300,000 miles on that bad boy. A 2008 with 300,000 miles. That tells you where I've been going. But I didn't mean to go on so long, but I want us, please, if you think about this old graying head, I'm telling you what I know. I'm sharing it while I'm alive. So you have to read about it after the fact, just like Chokwe did, just like others who are now ancestors of ours. We got what we needed from those brothers and sisters while they were with us. And we have a duty to carry that on, don't we? Don't we have a duty? And we gotta help, we gotta make sure. When Kali and them call, that's why when he sent me the email, I said, I'm there. I'm there. I know I got to come back Thursday for a family funeral, but I knew I was going to be here for Malcolm's birthday. But more importantly, for Malcolm's birthday, not at some highfalutin college campus where they just found out about Malcolm yesterday, but at the Lumumba Center. How perfect is that? To see our flag flying and us sitting up in here talking about revolution. And this is a great gathering. And I just want to say we need to support Cooperation Jackson with everything we have. With every dollar we can grab our hands on. I'll come over here, we'll do a street corner concert, whatever we need, we gotta work together to build this. And if we build this, then there's no telling where we can go. And that's a commercial for Cooperation Jackson. I'm a great fundraiser, except sometimes when it comes to my own self. But I can raise some money, I can pass the plate, and I can preach a sermon about the justice movement. And nobody can do it better. Except my younger brother.
So it's almost 9 o'clock. I want we don't try to hold people here too long. So 1 minute here, 1 minute David, 1 minute Chokwe, and we're gonna close out with a poem. 1 minute, go ahead.
I'm looking at all these questions and I'm listening to us talk about self-determination and being self-empowered and having economic stability and sustainability over time. And the one common denominator that we have not talked about is we really need to educate ourselves in formal settings. So, street corners, that's fine. That should be in addition to. But until we come together and figure out a reasonable and practical way that we can educate formally our own children and by virtue of our children, our adults. Let me say this. I attended the debate that they had over at the Masonic Lodge on Lynch Street. Out of all of the 12 or however many candidates they had, there's a whole other problem I can't get into. Chokwe was the only one who talked about gentrification.
Yeah.
He was the only one who mentioned gentrification. And it just went over. So before we can do anything, you're talking about a mindset that we have to change. And the only way we can change the mindset is to intensively and just bury ourselves in our history, our culture, and properly educating not only our children, but parents and elders. If we had that already, we will be that much closer to being more economically sound and sustainable.
So we got to come out of these halls of higher learning and go to the people.
But that's what
I'm saying. We got to get in the street.
Exactly.
We really need to stop just holding.
We can get in the streets, but we
It's important.
need to educate our children so that when the Chokwe's speak, we understand what gentrification means. The wheels should have been turning. When it came on the legislature floor for this 3rd grade testing, parents should have been outraged. We should have been at the Capitol. What does that look like? You're gonna test all 3rd graders and 35% of kindergartners come in unprepared? Right. What does that look like? Do y'all think that they're gonna stay in Miss Smith's classroom next year?
Well, we're gonna start the process on that.
That schoolhouse, the prison pipeline. But if we don't educate and if we don't find a way to massively change the mindset and teach African Americans how to read between the lines and think, synthesize information, retain information, apply information, and regurgitate that information, then everything we've said is for naught. Because what you're talking about is changing a mindset, and you do that by empowering the people through knowledge, which is why the legislature will not fund education.
That's right.
We are still as much a slave state as we were when we were out in the fields picking cotton, and William understands the reason that they did what they did in the legislature was to keep us in the fields.
Come on.
We're still in the fields.
Yeah.
And until we educate our children, Blackburn, all of these children, y'all, it's terrible.
Yeah.
Until we take over and get a school in every church in Jackson, in every elderly house in Jackson, find a way to reach the masses of all of our children. That is the only way we're gonna talk about number 5, number 4, number 3, number 2, and number 1. Not educated, and we do not have knowledge.
But one thing I want to point out just before the announcement, then we're gonna get to David and Chokwe and close out with a poem. Everybody put in your calendars July 7th, all right? July 7th. And then there's a donation bucket going around. If you can donate anything, thank you, Drew, for starting that out. It's gonna be passed around. But put in July 7th in your calendar. That's the first training on a people-centered human rights framework that the Human Rights Institute is doing. That's here at 6 o'clock on July 7th.
And where is that gonna
That's
be?
gonna be here, right here, 939 West Capitol Street, right here at the Lumumba Center. All right, that's the first of basically 9 classes that we're gonna be doing. And this is the work on building the Human Rights Charter and the Human Rights Institute that the City Council so graciously is working with us to help move, all right? So make sure you hear and tell other folks who are here. And also make sure that everybody that you hear and you register for the People's Movement Assembly on a just transition that we're doing here in June next month. That's the 26th through the 28th, right here. That's a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So make sure you have that in your calendars. David.
I was over here on the floor. I felt like a volcano with the top ready to pop off. I wanted to touch on number 2, 3, and 4 by answering question number 5, but we don't have time for that. I just want to issue something that anybody can walk away from here, whether you have $1 or 1,000. Please, on a piece of paper with a pen, maybe a notebook might be needed. Give your definition of what freedom means to you as an individual, for your family, and collectively. I'm going to repeat that. You don't need no money to do this. You just need a pen and enough paper, because I know most of you have not done it. And don't be offended by me knowing that. Your definition of freedom, individually, for your family, and collectively. Now, I just want to touch on something that was said earlier. I'm a bibliophile. I know books don't solve all problems, they don't feed children. But you have to feed that mind if you want to free that behind. Race First was written by Tony Martin. In that book, these arguments have already been fleshed out and answered. Race First by Tony Martin. You can go, if you're not a reader so much, go to the internet, enter attorney, automatics, Chokwe Lumumba, and reparations. And when you enter that, you're going to run into a 2-hour and about 30-minute or so lecture with himself, and Bobby Handel's on there, Jay Small. They deal with economics, education, health and wellness. They touch on almost every aspect of what it would mean to be free. So if you need to be informed before you write down what you write, or you want to be more informed after you write down your definition of freedom, that's something that all of us can walk away from here with. Most of us, 99% of us, have not done that. We have not truly conceptualized what freedom means, and most of our definition of freedom, unfortunately, have our oppressor in there somewhere.
So I want to put on that, if folks take up that challenge, and then we're going to create a wall out here for the next time we get together. Bring that with you so you can face it up and we can all look at it. That's the educational process and tool that we can use. And then we can organize a discussion around it to come up with some sense.
I want to bring that to that forum, that workshop, that set of 3 workshops that my brother Howard's going to lead here. He said he's going to lead 3 workshops for the 50 and under on economics.
We can do that.
And I love to bring those freedom definitions that each of us have and hold valuable to that workshop, because all of us could be raised. Those kind of workshops.
Chokwe, the poem, and then the folks are free to chill out, hang out with each other, socialize. We didn't do enough kind of cross-talking and dialogue with each other tonight. Initially, we wanted, just so folks know, we wanted to start off with the cross-section stuff and not a panel. But all of us getting here on time is an ongoing challenge. And that, not just, you know, to criticize folks, people coming from work, et
I
cetera.
came all the way from
So-
Greenville, I was on time.
But it's something in the future as we go here, you know, just doing panel discussions and speaking at folks is not the way we typically want to do our work, you know, and how we want to engage each other here in Cooperation Jackson, right, the Movement Center. There's other ways that we have to learn to engage with each other, and we got to practice that. And so we need feedback from all of you on what's the best way of doing that, so we can create some new patterns and some new dialogue. So I just want to leave with that so folks understand how we improve and get deeper, because there's a lot of voices we did not get a chance to hear. Some, you know, that don't mean you got to say anything, but I know everybody's sitting here with something in their mind that's of value to share with the group. And we hope that we can find different ways at different times to bring that out. And so you can enlighten all of us and we can be blessed with, you know, your knowledge and your perspective. So with that, I want to give it to Antar.
Okay. First of all, I just want to thank everybody for this. I thank everybody for your participation in this. Thank everybody taking the time out to remember, you know, our forefather, Brother Malcolm. And I thank everybody for their memory of my father and his struggle. That means a lot to me. And I'll be brief because a lot of what I was going to say I forgot now. So, but you know, first of all, Brother David, talking about freedom and what freedom is. First thing we have to understand is that there's no such thing as almost free. You can't be kind of free. You can't be a little freer than you were before free. I'm gonna get to be free someday type of freedom. You either free or you're not free, right? Freedom is either freedom or it is no freedom at all, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is we've talked about this and this kind of touches on a number of things that we've discussed. The other thing we gotta be weary of, right? People who seem to be sent here on a mission to lead our struggle, right? When their actual mission is to contain our struggle.
That is right. Now we get into it.
That's what we have to be weary of and we have to truly understand, right?
Yes.
We have more Black officials today, right, than we've ever had, right? But the material conditions in which our people live have not changed
Not at all.
at all, right? They've gotten worse.
You're right.
They've gotten worse, right? You have a situation, we're talking about how we deal with this wealth and how we do. You have a situation where 1 to 5% of the population of the country contain or control 90% of the country's wealth, all right? And so what we ultimately have to get to here in Jackson and what we have to be building towards is we have the choice of two things, right? We have the choice of economics by the people and for the people, or the choice of economics by a few people for themselves,
That's right.
right? That's what it all boils down to. All right, thank y'all so much. Thank y'all so
You
much.
want to do a vote?
No. I love for you to do Malcolm
Libs.
Libs. I
Can
love
I
for you
do
to
Malcolm Libs?
No, there's a poem that was.
Well, you can do that for me in the parking lot.
All right. I can do the Malcolm song after the board.
Okay.
No.
No?
No.
Can you hear me back there?
We can't hear you.
Okay, don't play coy with me. Anyway, this is a free write. Thanks all y'all for having really inspiring words. It's nice. Yeah, I'm looking at you, passion woman here. I'll stand in front of you. That's difficult to follow. Okay. Diamond mines mine diamonds. You know you find as you find freedom. Flight as we be, so I see you by a sea. Be a sacred, a scared, a sacred, a scared, a sea. Butterfly wings not brittle, no fragility, breaking pyramids in the math of paradigm shiftings, fizzing colorful, building bones strong. beat my chest, beat my feet, beat my beat, heat in the streets, walking with sway away from the way they say go slow, but we say no. Precise, swift, aim high, sky be my third eye, breathe deep. Lashes shield, fortify this sight, the fight is fierce, sing, black might. Diaphragm projection cries, soul sock, critical consciousness, no weakness, kind heart. No less than straight spine, clear speech, bow of rain, drops of shine, illumination moon. Reflection, collection, collaboration. Never be mine, be your own. Never be mine, be your own. Never be mine, be your own. Soul so fine as you find freedom. Soul so fine as you mine the diamond mine. Soul so fine as you laugh, dance, rise. Happy birthday, Malcolm X.
Oh, happy birthday, Malcolm. Happy birthday, Malcolm. Okay. This is a song that myself and my former partner, long story about that, wrote years ago called Malcolm Lives in the People's Struggle. And Antar had wanted me to sing this song several times before, but one of the times was, he said, I was hoping you would sing this. So I just would like to teach you the chorus because, you know, we do our stuff through call and response, the African way, where I teach you the chorus. If you learn it, you sing it with me. The chorus is, Malcolm lives in the people's struggle. His spirit is alive. Malcolm lives in the people's struggle. He will never die. So when we come to that chorus, I'll teach it to you, but I want you to share it with me. I want us to share it together. If they come for me in the morning, they'll come for you at noon. Listen to what I'm saying. They may be coming soon. There are many pages missing from the books of history. The Lord is the price of freedom, and it's no mystery why our prophets disappear. Why was our black prince shot down in his prime? What about the dream of freedom that he left behind? Will we learn the lesson Malcolm taught? Will we join the battle that he so bravely fought? Malcolm lives in the people's struggle. His spirit is alive. Malcolm lives in the people's struggle. He will never die. Let's sing it together. Malcolm lives in the people's struggle. His spirit is alive. Malcolm lives in the people's struggle. He will never die. Next time I'll bring the words and teach it to you. Thank you.
All right, thank you.